Are we ready? So, good evening, everybody. What I wanted to do tonight is just learn a little bit. L'zecher nishmat Rav Yaakov Tzvi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs's first yahrzeit was already begun to be observed about 10 hours ago, given the difference in time between us and England. And if you go on the website, you'll notice that there was this beautiful project that was initiated by the trust, that there are shiurim going all around the world over today, tomorrow, and the next couple of days as well in his memory. And what I did was I put together some sources from him that are based on some classic sources within Chazal. Some of them actually from Chumash, which is a step above Chazal as well, to try to understand the question of responsibility, of Jewish responsibility. And the very first source is a pasuk we all know, and everything is numbered on the left margin, so if you get lost, I'll tell you exactly where we're at. This is on line number 2, Ki tisat rosh bnei Yisrael lifkudehem, that when you lift up the heads of the Jewish people to count them, v'natnu ish kofer nafsho laHashem bifkodotam, every person has to give. This is talking about the machzit hashekel when you're counting them. V'lo yebahem negef bifkodotam. And if you do so, there won't be a negef when you count them. A negef is, from some terminology, is a magifa. There won't be any kind of calamity that will occur when you're counting them. And the question is, why should there be a negef? Now, the reality is, we know that at the time of David HaMelech, he did count the Jews. He counted them unnecessarily, and there was a plague. And we know that to this very day, when we count people, we use some other alternative method counting Jews. We'll count them with the pasuk of Hoshea Tamecha. For those who don't know that pasuk, I've heard people use the Motzi, which also has 10 words in it. Other people use a little bit more of a convoluted approach of not one, not two. I'm not really sure why inserting the word not doesn't make it a count as well. But they've done it. And the question, though, why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu have a problem with us counting Jews? Now, if you remember, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did count Jews himself. The very first thing we say in Sefer Shemot, right? And then we have the list, okay? Number 70 people who came down to Mitzrayim. So God counts the Jewish people. Why shouldn't we? Rashi there gives a bit of an introduction. And Rashi says the purpose for God counting the Jewish people was not to know how many Jews there were, but to identify that each individual was, as the Medrash says, was like a star in the sky, that there was this potential, there was this greatness. Or as we find elsewhere, things that are beloved, you count a lot. So for example, the example I used to give to young boys was, once upon a time, you kept on looking at your baseball cards and everything. Not that they ever changed, but you kept on making sure they were all there. Adults, you keep on checking your bank account. You want to make sure it's still all there. You're always counting things that are precious in one way or another. HaKadosh Baruch Hu counts us because we're precious. Whether we were 70 or we were 75 or we were 150, really didn't make a difference. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was showing the element of preciousness. And in fact, HaKadosh Baruch Hu identifies this to us when he comes back in Sefer Devarim. And in Sefer Devarim, Ki am kadosh atal Hashem Elokecha, b'cha b'char Hashem Elokecha liot lo le'am segula, that you are a sacred people to God. He chose you to be Am Segula. Now, Segula does not mean a people of great privilege. It doesn't mean a chosen people like it's normally translated, but a people of a responsibility. Over all of the people who are on the face of the earth, Lo mirubchem. God didn't choose us because we were large in size from other nations. God love you. But because we're the smallest of all people. In other words, if I choose you because you're the smallest by definition, that must mean that being large does not have an advantage. Because what other, if I choose you because you're small, I don't want to be large. So obviously counting doesn't have the same meaning in it. So Rabbi Sachs, in one of his videos, explained the following. And this is a transcript, and everyone can read the English themselves. I'll just skip over a few lines about it. Okay, as he would, he's very good with his numbers. For every Jew today, there are roughly 155 Christians and 120 Muslims. So we are minuscule in our numbers. More than 3,000 years later, the words of Moshe and Sefer Devarim remain true, that he didn't choose us because we're the most. There is, and I'm skipping down to line 19, there's a strange passage in the Torah. When you take a census of Israelites to count them, each one must pay the Lord a ransom for his life at the time he's counted. Then no mishap, negative will come when you can number them. Nations, skipping to line 24, wrote Rabbi Ztzl, and I apologize to his memory in the sense that his language is so magnificent. To skip a little bit is not fair, but you'll be able to read it on your own time. We only have 45 minutes tonight. Nations take censuses on the assumption that there's strength in numbers. The larger the people, the stronger it is. And that is why it is dangerous to count Jews. If Jews ever believed their strength lay in numbers, we would give way, God forbid, to despair. In Israel, there were always a minor power surrounded by he or she. Must contribute something in the Jewish into the human story. The Jewish question is not, what can the world give me? It is, what can I give the world? Judaism is God's call to responsibility. Now, what this means, what I said from pointing out on, if you're a minority, if you're a small number, ultimately, it's the power of the individual that counts. Because if it's the power of the collective, you'd want to have a lot of people. God says you're never going to be a lot of people. So it's always the power of an individual that is the most important thing. From that comes that responsibility. If we're an Am Segula, we have a responsibility to spread God's thought, God's mission in this world. We have to be the nation of example to the rest of the world. And we're never going to be the majority in the world, but we're always going to be a minority in the world. That means that every single person has to count. Every single person has a responsibility. Every individual is important. Writes the Rambam on page 2. And we all know this. This is a famous piece of the Rambam from Hilchot Tshuva. Lefichach, therefore, tzarich kol adam shireh atzmo kol hashana kula. Every person has to view himself all year long, kilu chatzio zakai v'chatzio chaya, as if he's 50% of him is to the positive and 50% is the negative, meaning half of him is innocent in the eyes of God and half of him is guilty in the eyes of God. And the same thing about the whole world. You make one sin. Therefore, you sin one sin. If everything is perfectly balanced, you sin one sin. Not only do you put yourself into the negative, but the whole world was equal. You put the entire world, and you could cause the destruction of the entire world. You do one mitzvah on the other side. Then all of a sudden, what you've done is you have moved the needle, to the innocence, to the side that is meritorious, and you cause him and them a sense of salvation and a sense of redemption. Means a person has the ability to make all the difference in the world. Now, what's interesting is if you look in this Rambam, the Rambam immediately has two phrases in the beginning that you normally don't think about it. When he says, "Lefichach tzarich kol adam," every person has this responsibility. Now, when it says every person, obviously means every individual person. Now, he doesn't say, by the way, every Jew. He says every person. And he also has that phrase, which I had underlined, kol hashana kula. And it's not something that happens just once a year, Yom Kippur time, when we normally think about tshuva, but it's every year, all the time. every act that a person does, ultimately we have to consider that that act can change the entire world itself. Now, that raises the level of responsibility for each and every person. We have a responsibility because we have an obligation as a nation, and the only way it's fulfilled is by this small little nation where every single person matters. But we also have to realize that it's not just about us and not even just about the Jews. It's about the entire world. We have responsibility. This is one of the things that was emphasized over and over again by Rabbi Sachs. One of the Rabbi Sachs would joke sometimes that when it came to being chief rabbi, he was the chief rabbi of the Jews for the non-Jews, because his impact very often was felt much larger in the broader world as a spokesperson for the ethics and the morals of Judaism, what Judaism could bring to the world itself. His radio shows on the BBC were not Jewish radio shows. They were radio shows that were given by clergy for the entire British public. His ability, even though there's a new book that just came out, it's only available right now from October 11th. It became available in Great Britain. It hasn't come yet. And its introduction is written by a person he learned Chumash with, some guy named the Prince of Wales. Okay? Now, the reality is, okay, he had those relationships and he was able to do it because he viewed the messages of Judaism as being messages that cross the boundaries of different peoples and different religions. And you can see it within this phrase, Kol Adam. And the idea at Kol Haolam Kulu. What we do impacts the entire world, not just our little corner in 60645, but the entire world. Rav Kook, in his Arpele Tohar, now nothing Rav Kook wrote was that easy to understand. Rav Kook was a mystic. Rav Kook had an ivrit that, Israelis still struggle to understand. But in his Arpele Tohar, he writes, Al Kain HaTzadikim HaTorim Enam Kovlim Al Risha. Real tzaddikim don't complain about evil. Ela Mosifim Tzedek. Rather, they add righteousness. Enam Kovlim Al Kfiram. They don't complain about people who are apostates, who don't believe, elamosifim emunah, but rather they believe more. Enam kovlim al habarut. They don't complain about people who are just foolish, are acting like boors. Elamosifim chokhmah, but they add intelligence. Meaning that what our responsibility is, we start out that every Jew has a responsibility. That's clear from the fact that we're so small, and clear from the fact that counting to see power is antithetical to a Jewish idea, can bring negative. We also know that our responsibility is to an entire world. We know it's a responsibility that is not just Jewish responsibility, but everyone's responsibility. And the responsibility is to be better ourselves. That where we see there are problems, it means, as Rav Kook would say, we have to improve what we do. We have to look at the positive. We have to build the positive. Rabbi Sachs wrote in his book, To Heal a Fractured World, he told a famous story. And it's famous because he told it many, many times, in many circumstances. Rabbi Sachs, like all good teachers, had things that he prepared uniquely for specific lessons. And then he had things that repeated themselves because they were just perfect examples. And he told this story. And I'm going to read the story. You can read all of the details later. But in 1966, an 11-year-old black boy moved with his parents and family to a white neighborhood in Washington. You know what happened. Well, I'm going to skip down line 45. I knew we were not welcome here. I knew we would not be liked here. I knew we would have no friends here. I knew we should not have moved here. As he was thinking these thoughts, a white woman coming home from work passed by on the other side of the road. She turned to the children and with a broad smile said, "Welcome." Disappearing into the house, she emerged minutes later with a tray laden with drinks and cream cheese and jelly sandwiches, which she brought over to the children, making them feel at home. That moment, the young man later wrote, changed his life. He gave him a sense of belonging. Line 59, the young man, Stephen Carter, is now a law professor at Yale. And he eventually wrote a book about what he learned that day. He called it Civility. The name of the woman, he tells us, was Sarah Kestenbaum. And he adds that it's no coincidence that she was a religious Jew. In the Jewish tradition, he notes, such civility is called chesed, the doing of acts of kindness, which in turn derive from the understanding that human beings are made in the image of God. Now, there's two lessons you can learn from this story that I see. I don't know which ones you will see also. There's a lot you can learn from it. But there's two lessons. How did this woman change this boy's life? That's a question you can answer whenever you'd like.
By being nice to them.
Cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Okay, in fact, in the continuation of his statement from the book Civility, he said he still can taste the cream cheese to this day. He can still taste it. By very, very small act of chesed, she was able to do it. If you remember the Rav Kook statement, she could have gotten up and started protesting the racism in her community. She would have done also, but instead what she did is she added with a small act of chesed, which means, remember that balance that we're in, that the Rambam talks about, you don't have to change the balance in a massive direction. If you change it just a little bit with a small act, you have that ability, which is the way an individual can make change. The responsibility of each and every individual is to do something, but not to do everything. To do that piece that we can do. And in fact, he quotes Rabbi Sachs on the next page, another idea. And this comes from Covenant and Conversation. If you remember, these were the weekly Divrei Torah that developed over the years. In 1535, Miles Coverdale published the first ever translation of the Hebrew Bible into English. Okay, the work had been begun by William Tyndale, who paid for with his life, burnt at the stake in 1536 for doing so. It was when he came to the word chesed that he realized there was no English word which captured its meaning. It was then that to translate it, he coined the word loving kindness. This idea of chesed that we do, the small actions that we do, is a uniquely Jewish tradition. It's been adopted by others, thank God, in the world. But it's something that we brought and we taught the world. In fact, if you look in modern Russian dictionaries today, you know how they translate into Russian chesed? It comes from the city of Kiev. In the city of Kiev, the Jewish community in Kiev opened up an organization very similar to the Ark down the block. And what they called that organization was the Chesed. Now, we know why they called it the Chesed. It's filled with Chesed. And in fact, throughout the former Soviet Union, there are these places now that are called Cheseds. They provide hot meals. They provide places for people to come together. They provide doctors' appointments, everything you'd imagine in the Ark plus. In modern Russian dictionaries, the Russian word for Chesed is Chesed. And you can even check it. If you don't trust me, go on Google Translate, type in the word in Hebrew, Chesed, and ask for its Russian translation. And the Russian translation is the word Chesed. It's a transliteration of the word because there was no word in Russian. We taught the Russian community what it means, what Chesed means. That small action can make the difference. Now, this next medrash is a medrash that comes Breshit Rabbah right at the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Mashal echad shaya over min makom lemakom. He provides a parable of a person who's traveling from one place to the next. Bera'ah bira achat doleket. I'm sure you've heard this. He sees this structure that is burning. Amar tomar shabira zo v'lo manhi. Is it possible that this building doesn't have a leader behind it to extinguish the fire? Hetzitz alav bala biram. And it's right then that the owner of this place looks out, just like peeks out. Amar lo anihu bal habiram. He says, I'm the owner of this building. Kach lefi shaya Avraham Avinu Omer. This is what happened with Avram. He would say, Tomar Sharulama Zebelo Manhig, is it possible this world operates the way it does without someone in charge? Ztzl HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God kind of peeks out, Marlo, and he said to him, Anihu Bal Ha'olam, I'm the master of the world. Now, let me ask you a bunch of questions about this. It's a fascinating medrash. Do you know what the word bira means? Modern Hebrew, what is Ir HaBira? Capital. Why isn't Ir HaBira called an Ir HaBira? Because in every major city, in a ruling city, there was a fortress. A bira is really a fortress. Okay, it was a seat of government, a seat of power. So this isn't he just saw some kind of building burn. He saw, often it's translated in English as a palace, but it's really a fortress that was burning. That's one. Number two, he asked, let's look at the question, what he asked. He said, Amor Tomar Shabira Zobelo Manhi. He says, is it possible that this bira is without a manhi? Ztzl Bal HaBira, then the owner of the fortress looked out, but Amarlo Anihu Bal HaBira. What was he looking for? Specifically, what was the language he was looking for? In Hebrew, what's the word he's looking for? It's line 73. It's the word right before the question mark. Thank you. Good guess. It's the word manhi. Who appears?
Oh, the Baal Habira.
The Baal Habira. What's the difference between a Baal Habira and a manhi?
Manhig leads.
Okay, manhig normally is a leader. By the way, I would tell you the difference here probably is the difference in English between the owner of a building and the super of the building. What's the difference ultimately in responsibility between the guy who's the super, okay, who's the manager of the building, and the guy who's the owner of the building? What's the difference between the two of those?
He protects it.
He has a responsibility to protect it. Good. How about the Baal Bira? He probably was the one who was involved in building it. He had invested of himself in the creation of this fortress. The manhig has a responsibility over it, but he could have just been brought in. He could have been the manager who was hired last week. That's a manhig. And it's interesting that he's looking for the one who's responsible, and ultimately, the one who built it is the one who shows up, the one who's truly invested. One last thing. How does this Baal HaBira interact with it? What's that first word? Ztzl alav. Now, Ztzl, he just like he's peeking out. He doesn't appear fully. That's what the Ztzl. Doesn't come on, hey, it's me, I'm here. He just looks out. Why would a person not jump out and say it's me? He's afraid. There's a hesitancy. He's afraid. He's being more passive than active in the picture. Look at the nimshal. Okay, when we talk now the parable and its explanation, right? The nimshal. Who is the Baal HaBira? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Is HaKadosh Baruch Hu afraid? No. So why would we use the word Ztzl for HaKadosh Baruch Hu?
Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to be manifest in the world. He wants people to recognize that he's behind everything.
Good. He doesn't want to reveal himself totally. He wants the involvement of others. Now, this midrash is about Avraham Avinu. And what it's telling us about Avraham Avinu is it trying to explain how Avraham Avinu got to the point of the Lech Lecha. And what it says to getting to the point of the Lech Lecha, that Avraham Avinu was ultimately philosophizing. He was trying to figure out what's going on in this world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him a little bit. He said, I'm the creator. And that's what happened. What is the fire? He sees a fortress on fire. Now notice in the Nimshal, it doesn't explain it. Line 75. Okay, Avraham Avinu, we don't see what he sees. Okay, we see God peeks out. We don't see the Nimshal of the fire. What is the Nimshal of the fire?
The fire is the corruption of the society.
Now look at Rabbi Sachs. Now Rabbi Sachs had a book called A Letter in the Scroll. If you haven't read it, it's one of the most accessible books he has. It is based on a series of seminars he gave early in his chief rabbinate to college students. And it's the series of things that basically says, why should you feel good about being Jewish? It's a wonderful book. I often, not just used to often, I'll give it out to seniors in high school as their graduation gift. I'll get it along with their diploma. If they haven't read it by then, they should be reading it. Avram sees a palace, 978. The world has order and therefore it has a creator. He gets it, but the palace is in flames. The world is full of disorder, of evil, violence, injustice. Now, no one builds a building and then deserts it. If there's a fire, there must be someone to put it out. The building must have an owner. So where is he? That is the question, and it gives Avram no peace. From time immemorial to the present, there have always been two ways of seeing the world. The first says there's no God, there are contending forces, chance and necessity, the chance that creates variation and the necessity that gives the strong victory over the weak. From this perspective, the evolution of the universe is inexorable and blind. There is no justice and there's no judge, and therefore there's no question. We can know how, but we can never know why, for there's no why. There's no palace, there are only flames. In other words, there's no order to the world. There's just this disorder, this chaos. The second view insists that there's a God. All that exists because he made it, all that happens transpires because he willed it, and therefore all injustice is an illusion. Perhaps the world itself is an illusion. When the innocent suffer, it's to teach them to find faith through suffering, obedience through chastisement, serenity through acceptance, the soul's strength through the body's torments. Evil is the cloak that masks the good. There's a question, but there's always an answer. For if we could understand God, we would know that the world is as it is because we would be less good were we otherwise. There's a palace, therefore there are no flames. The faith of Avram begins with the refusal to accept either answer, for both contain a truth, and between them there's a contradiction. The first accepts the reality of evil, the second, the reality of God. The first says that if evil exists, God does not exist. The second says that if God exists, evil does not exist. But supposing both exist, supposing there are both the palace and the flames. Judaism begins not in the wonder that the world is, but in protest that the world is not as it ought to be. It's that cry, that sacred discontent that Avram's journey begins. In other words, Avram Avinu was the very first to see that there is a palace, there's a God, but he saw that things aren't good. Now, if there's a God, how do you have things that aren't good? There's God, it means everything is good. You know, there are some people who are comfortable in life, and what they say is, okay, I get it, everything is good, and it's always good, but then you bump up against these really big bads every so often. You know, little bad you can justify sometimes. Sometimes you bump up against a really big bad. You know, the really big bad of the 20th century is the Shoah. No matter anyone who tries to answer that one, just ignore it. There was a book. There were two books that I bought over my life that I've returned. One of them was this one. Okay. Jackie Mason's brother, Rabbi Mazza, wrote a book explaining the Shoah, of why the Shoah happened. Now, I was fascinated, and then I started reading it, and I said, I can't do it. I just can't do this one. Okay. He believed that there were no flames, the way Rabbi Sachs would say it. The other book is a different story. What haunts us, 109, about the Midrash is not just Avram's question, but God's reply. He gives an answer that there is no answer. He says, in effect, I'm here, without explaining the flames. He doesn't attempt to put out the fire. It's as if instead he were calling for help. God made the building, man set it on fire, and only man can put out the flames. Avram asks God, where are you? God replies, I'm here, where are you? Man asks God, why did you abandon the world? God asks man, why did you abandon me? So begins a dialogue between earth and heaven that has no counterpart in any other faith. We don't believe that people are lives are predetermined. We don't believe in absolute good and bad in the same way in this world that we see it. We believe that there can be conflict. We believe that there can be things we can't explain. And if the way we want to go to sleep on it is by saying, There's got to be an answer. That's fine. But our job is to try to find that answer. Our job is to try to make a difference in the world. Nature looking troubled.
Yeah, because if God intervenes, then that eliminates our free will.
Right. But that's part of the challenge of what we have. In other words, you're dealing with there's a famous theological problem, right? And the theological problem is if God were to punish us immediately for everything we do there, we would then lose our free will, because if you get zapped, it's like the old science experiments. At some point, you're not going to let yourself get hurt by that electricity anymore. You'll learn the hard way. So he removes the free will. So God allows it. But then there's still does that mean that the evil in the world is for our good? Is the good in our world for us? We don't know. There are certain questions. In other words, what Rabbi Sachs is
It's
trying
for
to suggest.
us to recognize it and to.
Well, what it's for us is to grapple with it and to try to resolve things. God gives us, and this is not everyone will agree with this approach. God gives us a freedom. And that freedom he gives us has risks associated, but it has that responsibility that we need. We can't just sit back and say, I'm done. It's fine. Everything's going to be good. We need to be involved. There is a beautiful piece, again, Rabbi Sachs wrote books, he wrote it online. He had a WhatsApp, Kins wasn't the first one to have a WhatsApp, obviously. Okay, back in 2019. He writes, the place of doubt in Judaism is very interesting because most people define faith as certainty. I define faith as the courage to live with uncertainty. So we have to do things. We may not always know what the answer is. We may not even know for sure what we're doing is right. But we have to try to make that difference. Last piece. And the last piece is from his book, Future Tense. Again, a wonderful book. Rabbi Sachs's last book that he published was Morality, which is also, morality really goes the next step from Buber, of I and thou, okay, where it takes it a next step of I versus we. And that in order to resolve so many problems of the world, we have to reteach the world the idea of collective responsibility, not in a punishment sense, but that we all have responsibility in this world. It's not just me or you, it's the we of this world. In Future Tense, Rabbi Sachs does, and if you notice, this is about 10 pages, kind of collapsed into one page with a lot of spacing. We will not understand Judaism or the Jewish people or the trajectory of Jewish history until we ask what made Jews different. What are Jews called on to do, and why in the 21st century does it matter? The answer has to do with the future tense. Judaism is supremely the religion of the not yet. The answer, I believe, lies in four strange, highly distinctive features of Judaism as a faith. The first occurs at the formative moment in the life of Moshe. When the prophet encounters God at the burning bush, Moshe asks, "Who are you?" When the Israelites ask, "Who has sent you? What shall I say?" And God replies in a cryptic three-word phrase, "Ehekeh asher ehekeh." Now, I'm using, according to Halacha, there are 7 names of God that are sacred. We know the Yud Kei Vav Kei and Kel and Elohim. One of the names of God is Ehekeh asher ehekeh, which, if you see here, means ultimately, I will be that which will be. And that's what we need to say. Now, notice it's in a future tense. So what is God? It's as if God has said, line 141, my name is the future tense. If you seek to understand me, first you'll have to understand the nature and significance of the future tense. God isn't what was, God is what will be. The second is the Jewish sense of time. In the Hebrew Bible, a new concept of time was born. Time for ancients was cyclical, a matter of the slow revolving of the seasons and generation, and an endlessly repeating sequence of birth, growth, decline, and death. The Hebrew Bible is a radical break with this way of seeing things. God is to be found in history, not just in nature. Things do change. Human life is an arena of transformation. We're not living Groundhog Day. Keeps on changing until Avram and Moshe, no one thought of time as a journey in which where you are tomorrow will not be where you were yesterday. The future is not a mere repetition of the past. Change, growth, development are decisive moments that alter everything. God is not only present in eternity, he's also present in the here and now in the process of change and transformation. God is future, God is here. There's a sense of change. The third has to do with the nature of the Jewish narrative. The Hebrew Bible is a book of stories, quintessentially so. Whereas science and philosophy represent truth as a system, Judaism represents truth as a story, a sequence of events that must play themselves out in through time. There's no other story quite like it. It breaks all the rules of narrative form. It leads us to expectations that are never met in the way we anticipate. The Hebrew Bible is a story without an ending. The Bible leaves us with the unappeased memory of a future yet to be filled. In Judaism, we're always in the middle of a story whose ending lies in the future. Think about it for a minute. In the end of Sefer Bereshit, Yaakov Avinu wants to tell the Jewish people what's going to happen in the future. God stops him. If you look now, I'm in the process, so I have a Navi Shiur in Sefer Daniel. Over and over again, we talk about Mashiach in Sefer Daniel. He talks about Acharit Hayamim in all different kinds of forms. And we don't know exactly what he's describing. Judaism is the religion that even the Rambam, who does talk about the Yemot Mashiach, ultimately says, don't expend too much energy on it because it hasn't yet happened yet, and we don't know for sure what it will be, except Ke'im Shibud Malchuyot Bilvad, except for the fact that the nations of the world will accept God. That we know. But other than that, we don't know any of the other details. Ask somebody to tell you, even when it is, what's the structure? How many Mashiachim will be? Is it going to be one Mashiach or two Mashiach? Is there a Mashiach ben Yosef and a Mashiach ben David? Is there only Mashiach? We don't know all of these details. We're in the middle of a story. And that's the way the Torah presented it. No other book of Bible for any other religion is the same. Which brings us to the fourth of Judaism unique idea, line 161. It's the only civilization whose golden age is in the future. Judaism invented the messianic idea to be a Jew has always been to answer the question, has the Mashiach come? With the reply, not yet. Not while there is war and terror, hunger and injustice, disease and poverty, corruption, inequality. Hence the fourth conclusion. In Judaism, the golden age is always in the future. We have then in Judaism four remarkable related ideas. A God whose name is in the future tense, a future-oriented concept of time, a literature whose stories always end in a future not yet reached, and a golden age which belongs to the future. What ultimately what Rabbi Sachs is suggesting here is that when we talk about this idea of responsibility that we have, the responsibility is on everyone. The responsibility is to do what you can and not to imagine these great acts of transformation, but small acts of chesed, which can truly change a world. The act of responsibility is also one that God says that it's the way we participate in his world. He's asking us to be partners in the world. And ultimately, what we know is that the only way we will achieve what we need to achieve is when we work towards that future of what will be. Those are the structures of responsibility that a Jewish person has. And if you look at that responsibility very differently than what we normally say, you ask a person, what is their responsibility? Their responsibility is to learn Torah and do mitzvot. To learn mitzvah and do mitzvot are the prerequisites. But that's not how a Jewish person or a Jewish people's life can rise to its ultimate fulfillment. The ultimate fulfillment is to partner with God to make a difference for the entire world. Each individual fulfilling the role that they have as one person within the broader world itself. And that we should remember Rabbi Sachs and all that he offered. We remember when he was here. Okay, we remember he visited this shul twice. In fact, it's interesting, in Chicago, there were 2 times he appeared speaking before large audiences. Both of them were at KNS. We were zochet to have both of those opportunities. And I feel also a certain level of zchut, this idea of having this day in memory of Rabbi Sachs was developed by Rabbi Sachs's chief of staff, Joanna Ben Arush, who also was here with us. But Joanna, when she first came up with the idea, she reached out and she and I had a conversation. And I had a small piece in helping to fashion what's happening now around the country and around the world in his memory. His Zichro Baruch. Stop here.
There.